Hello, welcome to this hopefully quick presentation on my attempt to predict the finalists of the Eurovision 2021 cycle, or I'm calling the comeback year, seeing as how we did not have one last year. Like the 2019 cycle, I once again predicted 16 out of 20 semifinalists, so I feel quite empowered to proceed in this presentation. In this presentation, I will go over quickly semifinal one and semifinal two, the differences between my predictions and the actual results. I will try and find a winner, and then we'll sum it up. Uh, seeing as how tomorrow, Saturday, is supposed to be this final, so let's get through it. Semifinal one, like both semifinals, I had a two sets of predictions. I had one set of prediction that was based off of how I had ranked the 39 competing songs. And each semifinal, I said, based on how I ranked it, these are the 10 I would have advancing. And then I said, I also think that that won't hold. So let me be more realistic and give some more thought out predictions. So between for semifinal one, between the two predictions, um, I had three that changed. I had Belgium, Romania, and North Macedonia moving on based off of my rankings. But my predictions, when I thought them out, I said, let me have Cyprus, Russia, and Sweden moving on. And that worked out pretty well for me because eight moved on from my predictions. And one of the two that did not move on from my predictions, I had moving on in my personal ranking. That was Belgium. Norway was the one I had said that I would be least surprised if it moved on, so I somewhat expected it. So, predictions alone, I got 8 out of 10, but all in all, not super surprising to me who went because one, Belgium, I liked the song. I had it going off of my personal ranking, and Norway, there was hype. I didn't necessarily get the hype, but I wasn't going to be surprised if the hype paid off. Same thing with semifinal two. Again, personal ranking, thought out predictions. I had some change from my personal rankings. I had Austria, Albania, Denmark, Georgia going. And when I thought it out, I said San Marino, Latvia, Estonia, and Bulgaria. Did that pay off? Yes, it pretty much did because again, same situation where 8 of the 10 of my predictions moved on. One of the two that was not included in my predictions, I also had for my personal ranking moving on, and the other one was the one I said, "Oh, I won't be surprised if this moves on," and that was Serbia. So here are my rankings pre semifinals, and then the semis happened, and just to highlight on this page really quick, the majority of songs that got eliminated came from the latter half of my rankings. So the majority of songs moving on, I had ranked pretty high up. So it's understandably a very tough situation for me because I like a lot of the songs. So I don't have a super clear winner in mind. So that was like, another reason to try and work this out on paper. So here are the lineups for the quote unquote halves of each of the grand final. Um, it's just easier to split it into halves as opposed to just say, oh, 1 through 26. And so then I did several ways I tried to do a tableau. The first tableau I did was a straight tableau where I just had the corresponding entries or places from the two halves head to head. So the first from the semifinal, the first from the first half versus the first from the second half, the second from the first half versus the second from the second half, and so on and so forth. And then these were the results that my tableau that I wrote down. Cyprus versus Moldova. I like the song from Moldova. I think I have it a lot higher ranked than the song from Cyprus. But do I expect it to do better? No, unfortunately not. Um, I would love to see it do better. That'd be interesting to see because um, even though I couldn't get the whole, Lady Gaga uh, double theme with Cypress song out of my head, it's really just grown on me at this point. I feel like it's overwritten the other song. Um, because I half want to say El Dorado, but it's El Diablo. Right. And then Albania versus Germany. I gave it to Albania. Her performance in the semifinals was great. German song, it's grown on me to where I can say it's cute, but it's still like my lowest ranked. Israel versus Finland. The Finnish song, was really giving when it first came out. But when I saw it in the semifinal, I just didn't feel the same excitement for it. But that's a me thing. But again, this is my tableau. Belgium versus Bulgaria. Obviously, I have the Belgian song ranked a lot higher than the Bulgarian song. The Belgian song, I think, is in my top 10. The Bulgarian song is in my last 10, I think. But I think the Bulgarian song is the Duncan Lawrence of this year, and it's just going to keep on keeping on until it can't, unless it wins. But Russia versus Lithuania, I gave it to Russia. Again, I really like the Lithuanian song, but the Russian song just has so much quirkiness to its rhythms. Malta versus Ukraine, I could not decide, so I just kept it as Ukraine versus Malta to be determined. Same thing with Portugal and France. Portugal versus France. I could not decide. People will argue with me and say, you know what, France is an obvious winner. I would say you would think they're very very similar songs. The French song and the Portuguese song. They're very similar songs. They're very similar songs in my head. Okay, and you would think the Portuguese song I feel like has a lot of people who really like it, and I feel like there's a lot of people who are maybe vocally don't like it, but I feel like a lot of people actually do like the Portuguese song. But anyway, I couldn't decide. I could not decide. Serbia versus Azerbaijan. I gave it to Azerbaijan. Again, two very similar songs, upbeat songs, sung by women or a woman about women or whatever. Very, very. I guess not so much lady power, but just very fun, upbeat, danceable tracks. But my gut said Azerbaijan. Um, that's how it went. United Kingdom versus Norway. This was a tough one because United Kingdom feels like a solid dance track, but Norway I feel like has it's a sweet song, but it also has I feel like a lot of support behind it. But I gave it to United Kingdom. Greece versus the Netherlands. The Dutch song is I think the lyrics are the most profound, but the Greek song is so much fun to dance to, or just those are my vibes. Switzerland versus Italy. Again, another tough one because you have John Sears versus Måneskin, and we've only heard the preview for Måneskin. We haven't seen it perform, unlike all the other non-big fives, plus the Netherlands. So I don't have a good sense of how people would vote in that matchup because I'm sure it's going to be fantastic on stage, the Italian performance, but I gave it to Switzerland. Iceland versus Sweden. I've said many times how I felt about Swedish song, but the Swedish song to me is also like the Norwegian song in that it has a lot of public support. Iceland can't perform because of positive testing. Um, so, but I still think the Icelandic song is a lot better. I think a lot of people like the Icelandic song. So, maybe it wouldn't go to Iceland, but I put it for Iceland here. Um, then we had Spain versus San Marino. I gave it to San Marino. I know. I feel like the adrenaline that it's grown on me a great deal. It's probably the one that's grown me the most, possibly of the finalists. Um, Spain is a sweet ballad, especially in this year where it's like, yes, we're talking about loss and the singer lost a relative to COVID. So it's an apt song, but I gave it to San Marino. I kept on Cyprus versus Albania, again, I could not decide. I could not decide. Yes, the song from Cyprus is upbeat, but you're telling me against the Albanian vocals, there's a clear winner? I don't think so. Israel versus Bulgaria, she hit those notes. It was fantastic and great, but again, even though I don't like the Bulgarian song super much, I still think it's a Duncan Lawrence, and it keeps gonna keep pushing on. So I pushed it past, and it took the matchup. I had to keep three because I had an odd number of matches for this round. So I kept three. I kept Russia, kept Ukraine versus Malta, and Portugal versus France. Azerbaijan versus United Kingdom. There, again, Azerbaijan has its nice dance beat. United Kingdom has its dance beat too, but I gave it to Azerbaijan. Greece versus Switzerland. Again, upbeat song, but those vocals, but those Swiss vocals, Swiss Albanian vocals. And then Iceland versus San Marino. Again, I couldn't decide, and I was not going to force myself to. And then finally, I said I kept Cyprus versus Albania because I still couldn't decide. I said Bulgaria versus Russia. I gave it to Bulgaria just because I feel like Bulgaria's going to keep on keeping on. It's the Duncan Lawrence of this year. I don't get it, but apparently a lot of people do, and apparently a lot of people like it. So I gave that to Bulgaria. Ukraine versus Malta, and Portugal versus France. Still can decide. Azerbaijan versus Switzerland. I gave it to Switzerland because those vocals, and I still can't decide for Iceland versus North Macedonia. So that's why this tableau ends, because I couldn't narrow it down further. But I said, you know what? It can't be that I can't find a winner. So I tried to do the reverse tableau, where instead of 1 versus 1, we're doing 1 versus the 26. 1 versus the reverse of the second half. I could have said the reverse of the first half versus the second half, but this is how I did it. So Cyprus versus San Marino, Albania, Sweden, Israel. Y'all can read. So I said Cyprus versus San Marino, just because, and again, I feel like this is a contentious one. Cyprus versus San Marino. I gave it to San Marino. San Marino 2022 again, fun prospect. I could be very wrong with this, and this matchup. It's not like, and again, it's not like these are actual matchups. But I'm saying, in a hypothetical, maybe you think that Cyprus would win out with San Marino. I don't. Albania versus Sweden. Albanian vocals. Swedish support, Albanian vocals. Sorry. Israel versus Italy. Italy is a fun upbeat time. Italy takes it. Belgium versus the Netherlands. Belgium. Russia versus Norway. Russia. Yeah. Malta versus Azerbaijan. Now, the Maltese song, I have it higher ranked, but I gotta say it's not always my favorite song because sometimes it sounds too era, too like 50s or too period piece to me. But her vocals, so Malta. Portugal versus France. Can't decide. I never decide as far as so. Serbia versus Ukraine. I gave it to Ukraine. Kashum. United Kingdom versus Lithuania. Lithuania because dance party time. Greece versus Bulgaria. Again, Bulgaria. Finland versus Switzerland. Switzerland. Those Swiss Albanian vocals. Iceland versus Germany. Iceland, is it even a question? Spain versus Moldova. Moldova. So yes, this reverse tableau was a lot easier for me to go through. To a point. San Marino versus Albania. Albanian vocals versus crazy fun time on stage. Again, these are not how I rank the songs, but just what I expect, right? So I gave it to San Marino. Italy versus Belgium. I like the song from Belgium a lot, but I think Måneskin will have. I think it's just more upbeat. It's giving you the rock metal, while also giving you the fun dance time. Russia versus Malta. Um, I said, I said Russia, possibly. This really could have been Russia versus Malta. I don't know, but I said Russia for this tableau, for this tableau because I did this twice. This reverse tableau, specifically because of that. So let's imagine that Russia and that hypothetical matchup moves on. Portugal versus France. You can read. Did inside Ukraine versus Lithuania? Gave it to Ukraine, and that is tough. But I had it ranked higher, and I know how I feel about those songs, especially my personal opinion. Bulgaria, stayed the same. Switzerland stayed the same. I wonder why I didn't change the color there. And then Iceland versus Moldova. Iceland. Okay. So Switzerland versus Iceland. That's tough. But I think the fact that, again, presumably that we'll have a live performance from Switzerland edges it out. Russia versus Ukraine. I gave it to Ukraine. That's also like a really, because I don't know. Maybe the voting would hypothetically give it for Russia, but I don't think so. I think the song from Ukraine, the Ukrainian song is much better. Yes, because it's my number one ranked for a reason. San Marino versus Italy, which is hilarious because one's in the other. But I gave it to San Marino, right? And so that's, again, I couldn't narrow it past this. The San Marino, Ukraine, Portugal, France, Bulgaria, Switzerland. But again, I wasn't really sure about that Russia Malta matchup. I wasn't, I'm like, really? 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 So it's pretty much the same, except instead of Ukraine taking it, I just have another spot where I can't decide, and it's just Ukraine versus Malta, whoever wins that out. So, um, and then I said 2 by 2. So instead of, uh, you know, wild polarities, or middle of the pack, we have just adjacent groupings. So the first versus the second, the third versus the fourth, the fifth versus the sixth, and so on and so on. So, Cyprus versus Albania. Cyprus, again, would Cyprus beat out Albania? Because Albanian vocals, but also fun upbeat song. I don't know what's in people's hearts in terms of voting this year. So, um, Israel versus Belgium. I love the Belgium song, but I feel like Israel will get a lot of votes. I don't know that it would or would not. I don't know how extant politics would affect this or will affect the voting. I don't know that will or will not be a thing, because even last year when it was in Israel, what happened? The whole thing with the politics. So, but maybe the one thing from Iceland. But anyway, Russia versus Malta. I gave this to Malta. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. I feel like there's a lot of support for the Maltese song. Uh, the Russian song is also very quirky, but I gave it to Malta. That's why I just had the two passes. Um, Portugal versus Serbia. I gave it to Portugal because I love that song so much. And I think it's an underrated song that's gonna surprise a lot of people, possibly. United Kingdom versus Greece. I gave it to Greece because, again, I like the Greek song more. Switzerland versus Iceland. A toughie. Because the Icelandic song is fun, upbeat, but the Swiss song, those Swiss Albanian vocals, I gave it to Switzerland. Spain versus Moldova. Spain. We need, there. That really is the one song in the finals that's really like, ooh, the pain of loss, the ballady. That's the most ballady song, I feel like. Um, because the Bulgarian song is not super ballady per se. Maybe not the most ballady, but it's you get whatever. It's the most timely ballady song of them all. So Germany versus Finland. Finland. Um, yes. Bulgaria versus Lithuania. Again, I have the Lithuanian song ranked higher than the Bulgarian song, but I think Bulgaria has a lot of support. Again, it's the Duncan Lawrence this year for me. Um, Ukraine versus France. This is a tough one because they're both in my top 10. And Ukraine is my number one. But France, maybe? Because I think there's also a lot of support for France. But this is, again, that's why a lot of these have question marks because it's like, really? Really? But especially on the Ukraine versus France. Really? Azerbaijan versus Norway. I think Azerbaijan. I don't. I don't know that I would be really surprised if it would be Norway. Again, in this hypothetical scenario in my mind. Netherlands versus Italy. Italy. San Marino versus Sweden. San Marino. So again, knocking it down further. Cyprus versus Israel. I gave it to Cyprus. But again, it's like, would it not? Because Israel has better vocals, but Cyprus is a fun track, and again, who knows how people are gonna vote. Malta versus Portugal. Couldn't decide. A lot of people might be like, that's an easy one, it's Malta. I don't think so. I don't think so. Greece versus Switzerland. Switzerland. Spain versus Finland. Finland. Even though, again, it's like, really? Really? I think so. I think so. Um, it could be Spain. It could have been Spain very easily in that matchup. But I think it would be Finland because I think it's just a more energetic song. Bulgaria, I kept. France, I kept. San Marino, I kept, again, because of the odd numbers of matchups. And then Azerbaijan versus Italy, I uh, gave it to Italy. Um, Again, that's another one that maybe one could argue maybe Azerbaijan would win. I didn't think so. Malta versus Portugal or Cyprus. I said that Malta versus Portugal, whichever one out of that, would probably beat the Cyprus song. Um, Switzerland versus Finland. I gave it to Switzerland. France versus Bulgaria. Now, I've been saying that Bulgaria is the one that's going to keep on keeping on, but I don't think that the Bulgarian song would beat up the French song. They're both very much like, I'm starting here and I'm in my emotions and, let's explore those emotions. But the French song builds in a more dramatic way, whereas the Bulgarian song is just very sweet, which could work for a lot of people, but for me it didn't. And then Italy versus San Marino, I gave it to San Marino. So, that's who. That's just as far as I got on this tableau. Malta versus Portugal, Switzerland, France, and San Marino. Um, so again, here are the results for each of the respective tableaus. Um, the two reversed and progressively, I went from about at least 8 to 5 by the 2x2 tableau, but I still couldn't narrow it down. But who appeared? Who appeared uh, regularly throughout? Ukraine appeared only in the straight and reversed. Malta appeared in at least everyone, except for the first reverse pass. Bulgaria as another one like Ukraine, only in the first two. Switzerland, I have in all of these tableaus San Marino. I have in all of these tableaus Portugal and France. I have in all of these tableaus. Um, so, I don't know. I could not narrow it down. And that's not to say that those are my favorite songs, because I have the songs how I have them ranked for a reason. Um, but maybe I'm just overthinking this. I feel like there's just 3 songs that to me are probably the ones I hear people talking about the most, or it seems that people really feel passionate about one way or the other. So I feel like it could possibly just be Malta, Bulgaria, or San Marino, one of the 3. Um, again, I have Ukraine ranked first. So I would love to see Ukraine ranked first. I would love to see it follow um, my ranking or whatever. Um, but I don't know that I think that obviously I don't think so. Um, for this top three I have listed here, that there's an outright for sure winner, and I think that for me that's because 16 of the 26 were in my top 20. For me, it's a very tight race because I ranked so many of them so high, respectively. Um, so it's generally like a tough. It's an even, competition generally speaking. So we're either gonna go very basics and predictable, like if it's a repeat of the Duncan Lawrence type where Bulgaria wins, that might be the case. Or it might, or if it's just one of these, oh, everyone likes this song and that's the song that won, or it could be utter chaos. It could be utter chaos and just wild surprises all around. Obviously, I like wild surprises all around, and it's not necessarily a wild surprise because there are 26 people, 26 entries competing that each have a chance theoretically to win. So it's not super wild or ridiculous, but it's anyone's game realistically. And this was just for fun. This was just for try because I don't have like I really like this song this year and I think it's definitely strong enough to beat all of the other songs. I don't know that I feel super confident about say my top 10, each of them definitely winning, but um I don't think so. So but I've enjoyed the songs this year and I think they've all been great. So anyway, thanks for watching. um Let me know what you think if you have time, because again, this is going up really late with respect to tomorrow and time zones and whatnot. So thanks for watching. Till next time, goodbye. Yes.